As Jimmy Page nears his 80th birthday, he has finally answered certain questions that fans have had for years. There are certain revelations about his life and work that we will explore in this video. The truth about his drug use and occult connections will be exposed by us. If the mysterious background of the man behind the famous guitar riffs has ever piqued your interest, you should stay tuned. Some surprising information that Page recently revealed is about to be revealed. The first step is to find out what really happened in Jimmy Page's history. Jimmy Page, a legendary guitarist in rock and roll, came into this world in Hounslow on January 9th, 1944. James Patrick Page and Patricia Elizabeth Gaffigan were his parents. The family firm made plastic coatings, and his dad oversaw the employees. His Irish-born mother was a doctor's secretary. Feltham, Surrey, and Epsom were the subsequent stops on the family's 1952 move when Jimmy was 8 years old. After finishing elementary school at Epsom County Pound Lane, Jimmy continued his education at Ewell County Secondary School. At the age of 11, Jimmy went to the Miles Road house to pick out a Spanish guitar, which would later become his first instrument. Although it became his first instrument, its owner remained a mystery. He picked it up when he was 12 years old. Even while he had some lessons in Kingston, he mostly taught himself how to play. Although there weren't many guitarists in the neighborhood at the time, Jimmy was taught his first chords by an older youth named Rod Wyatt. Pete Calvert, along with another youngster, would drop by to hone his abilities alongside them. Even though his guitar was sometimes confiscated, Jimmy would practice for 6 or 7 hours daily. Jimmy looked up to Elvis Presley, particularly Scotty Moore and James Burton, the guitarists. To Jimmy, the song Baby Let's Play House by Elvis meant the world. At future Whole Lotta Love gigs with Led Zeppelin, he performed the Scotty Moore verse. Jimmy gathered enough money from his job delivering milk to purchase his first guitar. It had a pickup for an amplifier and was a Hofner President acoustic. After seeing Buddy Holly play one on TV, he decided to trade in his old 1959 Futurama Grazioso solid body electric guitar for a brand new and improved Fender Telecaster. Jimmy loved to listen to many kinds of music, but his favorite was the classic English style known as skiffle. He was also a fan of acoustic folk and blues music. In the beginning, he said his music sounded like a cross between blues and rock. At the tender age of 13, Jimmy had an appearance on the television talent show All Your Own when he played with a skiffle ensemble. When asked what he envisioned himself doing when he grew up, Jimmy said that barring any breakthroughs in the field, he would do biological research in the hopes of discovering a cure for cancer. They performed renditions of In Them Old Cotton Fields Back Home and Mama Don't Want No Skiffle Anymore. Throughout his teenage years, Jimmy was a member of many bands. At the age of 14, he joined a band called Malcolm Austin and the Whirlwinds, where he performed the songs of Jerry Lee Lewis and Chuck Berry. Jimmy reassembled the Paramounts with Rod Wyatt, Pete Calvert, and David Williams after this group's brief popularity. While playing live in Epsom, the Paramounts supported a band that would later be known as Johnny Kidd and the Pirates. Despite interviewing for a job as a lab assistant, Jimmy decided to forego a career in education and devote himself fully to his music career when he was 15 years old. Following a contentious argument on his musical ambitions with the school's deputy head, he was permitted to leave after completing 4 GCEO levels. Jimmy had a hard time finding other musicians he could regularly play with. He was in several bands and bussed a lot. The Redcaps, Royston Ellis's backing band, invited Red E. Lewis to join them. Ellis was a beat poet and vocalist. After that, singer Neil Christian saw Jimmy play and asked him to join the Crusaders. Jimmy and Neil Christian were on the road for over 2 years, and Jimmy was featured on several Neil Christian songs, including the 1962 smash hit The Road to Love. Regrettably, Jimmy had glandular fever at this time and was unable to continue touring. Instead of continuing with music when he was sick, he decided to put his second love, painting, on wait. He enrolled at Sutton Art College in Surrey. Subsequently, Jimmy said that he needed to prioritize his health as his continual traveling had made him pretty ill. Throughout the following 18 months, he focused only on his recuperation and survived on a little income, all the while continuing to play guitar. Session guitarist Jimmy Page got his start playing with Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, Cyril Davies All-Stars, Blues Incorporated, and Alexis Corner at London's Marquee Club. Columbia Graphophone Company sought his assistance in recording singles when Brian Howard and the Silhouettes' John Gibb contacted him. After Jimmy proved himself, Decca Records' Mike Leander hired him full-time for studio work. A big hit that peaked at #1 in early 1963, Diamonds was recorded at his first session for Decca and included Jet Harris Harris and Tony Meehan. Jimmy opted to focus only on session work after brief tours with several bands. Little Jim Page was his stage name, so he could be distinguished from another famous session guitarist named Big Jim Sullivan. When another guitarist or replacement was needed, Jimmy would frequently be brought in as insurance, since he would play anything he wanted to play. He wrote songs for famous bands like The Who and The Kinks, and became session guitarist extraordinaire for record producer Shel Talmy. As Tears Go By Marianne Faithfull, We're Wasting Time by the Rolling Stones, and Downtown by Petula Clark were just a few of the popular songs that included Jimmy in 1964 and 1965. The Beatles' 1964 film A Hard Day's Night included music composed by him on guitar. The Rolling Stones manager Andrew Loog Oldham hired Jimmy in 1965 to work as an A&R specialist and house producer for the newly formed Immediate Records label. Nico, Eric Clapton, John Mayall, Chris Farlow, Twice as Much, and Chris Farlow were among the artists whose songs he produced and performed. Immediate Records compilations and the double CD Jimmy Page. Session Man showcased some of Jimmy's early jam sessions with Jeff Beck and Eric Clapton, covering a range of new themes, but the only copies of Jimmy's early tunes are bootleg recordings. Jimmy recorded Scarlet in October 1974 with Rick Grech, bass, Bruce Rowland, drums, and Keith Richards, guitar of the Rolling Stones. Later on, Jimmy decided to leave his studio employment due to the growing influence of Stax Records on popular music. This influence led to a shift away from guitars and towards brass and orchestral arrangements. At the tail end of 1964, the Yardbirds wanted Jimmy Page to replace Eric Clapton, but Page declined due to his relationship with Eric. Following Clapton's 1965 resignation due to health concerns, Jimmy turned down the band's offer for a second tour. He instead recommended Jeff Beck for the position. The 1966 recording of Beaks Bowler at London's IBC Studios with guitarist John Paul Jones, drummer Keith Moon, and pianist Nicky Hopkins encouraged Jimmy to form a supergroup. The project was halted owing to contractual issues and the inability to find a suitable vocalist. The term Led Zeppelin first appeared during one of Keith Moon's jokes about the band's impending demise. After Jeff Beck left the Yardbirds, Jimmy offered to step in and the rest of the band accepted. With the help of guitarists Jeff Beck and Chris Dreja, they transitioned from playing electric bass to guitar. The band never really played as the Yardbirds, despite the fact that they only had the song Happening 10 years ago on their album. In 1968, in order to finish off unfinished tour dates in Scandinavia, Jimmy formed a new band. He persuaded John Paul Jones to join the new band, as well as drummer John Bonham and vocalist Robert Plant. The band's manager Peter Grant changed the spelling to Led Zeppelin when the members decided to be known as the New Yardbirds rather than Led Zeppelin in an effort to avoid any mispronunciation issues on their Scandinavian tour. Led Zeppelin is one of the most successful bands of all time, with over 200 million albums sold worldwide, including 111.5 million in the US alone. Jimmy Page's ambition for Led Zeppelin, as the band's producer and guitarist, was to combine elements of hard rock, blues, and acoustic music with memorable choruses. Following record-breaking concert tours, the band became notorious for their extravagant lifestyle. Their traveling pace and output slowed in the late 1970s due to internal conflicts within the band. Jimmy's tenure with the Yardbirds provided him with an abundance of ideas that enabled him to improvise during live performances and create an unprecedented mix. He envisioned a pulsating, exciting score with lots of contrast between light and dark. Following drummer John Bonham's death in 1980, Led Zeppelin decided to part ways. Jimmy was so distraught by his loss that he took a break from playing guitar. As the 1980s drew to a close, Jimmy kept busy composing film scores and working on short-term projects in collaboration with musicians and artists. Furthermore, he began engaging in philanthropic endeavors. In March of 1981, Jimmy returned to the stage for a Jeff Beck concert at the Hammersmith Odeon. In the latter half of that year, he formed a combo called XYZ, an acronym for X Yes and Zeppelin, with Yes drummer Alan White and bassist Chris Squire. Eventually, their work was used on other projects including Fortune Hunter by The Firm and Mind Drive and Can You Imagine by Yes. Michael Winter and Jimmy recorded the score for Death Wish 2 Inches in 1982. A few of albums later, Jimmy and Paul Rodgers released music as The Firm. The first album reached number 17 on Billboard's Pop Albums chart upon its 1985 release and went on to win gold in the United States. The 1986 release of Mean Business marked the second album. Sessions with artists like Graham Nash, Stephen Stills, and the Rolling Stones were among Jimmy's many ongoing projects. With the help of Robert Plant and Plant's solo album Now and Zen, Jimmy released a solo album in 1988 titled Outrider. In 1986, he reunited with his former Yardbirds bandmates to contribute to the Strangeland album by Box of Frogs. The occult was another area in which Jimmy became famous. The common public often found themselves captivated by these mystical and esoteric subjects. The focus of this fixation was Aleister Crowley. The ideas and teachings of the notorious English magician Crowley had a profound impact on Page. Famous for his work in literature, painting, ceremonial magic, and self-proclaimed occultism, Aleister Crowley was born in England, Frater Perdurabo and the Great Beast 666. His mother's title were among his several aliases. Ignoring the problem, Crowley had considerable influence. Also, he was mentioned by artists such as the Rolling Stones and David Bowie. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band included his likeness on the record cover. The members of Led Zeppelin, including Jimmy Page, were greatly influenced by Crowley. Some of the earliest blatant references to Crowley may be heard on The Immigrant Song from Led Zeppelin's third album. They see the lyrics as a reflection of Crowley's commandment, "Do what thou wilt." Crowley bought the old Chapel Boleskine house in August 1889, which was located on the shores of Loch Ness. The fact that the parish priest and parishioners were inside during the fire gives it a shady history. Crowley lived there and sacrificed a great deal for a long time. Due to his fascination with Crowley, Jimmy Page purchased the same home in 1971. On his first night at Boleskine House, Page had a terrifying experience due to the strange noises he kept hearing, such as someone pounding on the floor. The housekeepers evaded his questions by claiming in hushed tones that someone else had heard the head roll. Legend has it that Page allegedly had the other members of Led Zeppelin sign a blood contract promising him fame, money, and talent. However, no one has ever confirmed this. The only musician that declined was bassist John Paul Jones. After playing a Led Zeppelin 4 cassette, Page let the audience choose a sign from the Book of Signs. An icon that resembled the inverted form of the logo for Ballantine beer was chosen by John Bonham. Mot, the Egyptian goddess of truth, was symbolized by the pen inside a circle that Robert Plant used as his sign. For the purpose of confronting evil spirits, John Paul Jones wore this insignia. Scholars disagree on who came up with the idea for Page's sign Zoso. Magician Jay Carden drew it around 1557. Since Page is a Capricorn, the astrological sign associated with Saturn, it is reasonable that they would attribute a connection to the planet Saturn. The legendary rock band Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven began life in a derelict Welsh cabin and was finished at Headley Grange in Hampshire. Though it's up for debate, some scholars have claimed that the lyrics portray a descent into a black mass. Even though it was never meant to be a single, the song became a huge success and contributed to Led Zeppelin 4 being one of the best-selling albums of all time. In 1972, Page met the infamously weird and occult-themed filmmaker Kenneth Anger. Page was convinced by Anger, a Thelema and Crowley supporter, to fund Crowley's homage Lucifer Rising. The soundtrack was also created by Page. Jimmy Page's fascination in the occult led him to launch the London esoteric bookshop Equinox in October 1973. There was a deluge of esoteric literature in the store, including tomes on Kabbalah, tarot, and Eastern philosophy. However, Page was forced to shut the bookshop in 1978 due to his escalating drug addiction and diminishing interest in witchcraft. In the mid-1970s, Led Zeppelin started to fade away. While on vacation in Rhodes in 1975, Jimmy Page traveled to Sicily to see Crowley's old abbey of Thelema. A horrific car crash involving Robert Plant and his loved ones occurred the next day. Plant and the band were deeply affected by the unidentified stomach illness that claimed the life of Plant's son Carrick in 1977. In 1980, after a night of heavy drinking, drummer John Bonham delivered the killer blow when he choked on his own vomit. This was the cause of Led Zeppelin's breakup. Jimmy Page's preoccupation with the occult, particularly the teachings of Aleister Crowley, had a profound impact on his life, the music, and the reputation of Led Zeppelin. Despite the mystique that the tales and rumors surrounding Page and the occult create, the band's fame was due to their innovative music and outstanding musicianship. Famous for his ferocious live performances and guitar solos, Jimmy battled substance abuse in the 70s. Drug use, however, played a significant role in his life behind the scenes. At this point in time, time, Page has been open and honest about his struggles with drugs, acknowledging that they have influenced his life and career. Guitar World magazine published an interview with Page in 2003 in which he candidly addressed his drug use. He made it clear that drugs had a significant role in his experiences during those years by saying, "I can't speak for the other members of the band, but for me, drugs were an integral part of the whole thing right from the beginning right to the end." Page discussed his drug use with journalist Nick Kent after Led Zeppelin's 1973 North American tour. Questioned about the impact of his extensive drug consumption on his memory, Page said, "Oh, everyone went over the top a few times. I know I did, and to be honest with you, I don't remember much of what happened." In 1975, Page began using heroin, and his drug usage continued to rise after that. According to Richard Cole, the band's road manager, Presence Page and Richard Cole allegedly used heroin while recording the album. It wasn't long before Page admitted he was addicted to heroin. Addiction quickly began to have a detrimental effect on his health and professional life. Page began to feel the effects of his heroin addiction on his guitar playing in 1977 when Led Zeppelin began their North American tour. He had grown more secretive and lonely due to his addiction and seemed to have lost some weight. As Page's addiction consumed him, his changing behavior negatively impacted the band's primary singer Robert Plant's connection with him. It was also easy to see that Page was addicted when they were recording In Through the Outdoor Page in 1978. Compared to his other albums, this one didn't have as much of Page's influence. He was absent from the studio for long stretches due to his heroin addiction, which contributed to this. The importance of the band's pianist and bassist, John Paul Jones, began to grow during this period. Despite claims that Page beat heroin in the early 1980s, he continued to struggle with substance abuse. In 1982 and 1984, Page faced 2 arrests for possession of cocaine. By virtue of his 1982 12-month conditional release, he was spared incarceration so long as he remained law-abiding. Following his second arrest, he was fined instead of sent to jail. Page became angry in 1988 when an interviewer brought up his history of drug abuse. He pointed out, "Do I look as if I'm a smack addict? Well, I'm not, thank you very much." This response shows how much Page cared about his reputation and how much he wanted to forget about his problems in the past. The question of whether Page felt guilty about his cocaine and heroin use came up in a 2003 interview with Q Magazine. His comment provided insight into his complex thinking at that time. He made statements like, "I don't regret it at all because when I needed to be focused, I was focused. That's it. And that's going some. You've got to be on top of it." These quotes suggest that Page used drugs to enhance his focus and productivity during recording sessions. Despite the negative aspects, a large portion of Jimmy Page's story is devoted to his struggles with substance abuse and addiction. Everything from his personal life with Led Zeppelin to his career was affected by his struggles with heroin and cocaine. Despite his forthrightness, it is clear that these issues were a major roadblock for him at a pivotal point in his life. It doesn't matter how hard things become. Page's musical achievements are still proof of his talent and dedication. It means a lot to me that you all tuned in. Jimmy Page's revelations captivated us, and we hope you did too. It is always enlightening to hear the legends talk about their backgrounds and the real behind-the-scenes stuff. If you like this comprehensive biography of Jimmy Page, please consider liking and subscribing for more videos like this one. Your thoughts and feelings are important to us. Which part of Jimmy's confessions caught you by surprise the most? Please share your opinions in the space provided. Stay curious and rock out till we meet again.